Welcome to the Workology Podcast, a podcast for the disruptive workplace leader. Join host Jessica Miller-Merrill, founder of Workology.com, as she sits down and gets to the bottom of trends, tools, and case studies for the business leader, HR, and recruiting professional who is tired of the status quo. Now here's Jessica with this episode of Workology.
Welcome to the Workology Podcast, sponsored by Workology. Since the outbreak of COVID-19, the number of people who have worked remotely because of concern about the coronavirus has risen 46 percentage points, according to the latest Gallup poll data. 62% of employed Americans currently say they have worked from home during this crisis, a number that has doubled since mid-March. And while 59% of remote workers are confident they are successfully meeting their job requirements, employers are struggling to balance supporting our remote workforce with plans to reopen physical locations in preparation for a return to office. Today I'm joined by Dave Landa. He's the CEO of Kintone Corporation, which provides a teamwork platform with a visual application builder that empowers individuals, teams, and organizations to effectively manage their data and workflow for better collaboration. Since 2004, Dave has been at the forefront of the cloud revolution, driving strategic business development on executive teams of leading SaaS application providers. Dave, welcome to the Workology Podcast.
Thank you, Jessica. It's great to be here. Thanks for having me.
Your company is focused on helping organizations of all sizes improve their collaboration and efficiency, but the road you took to get there wasn't easy. Tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah, sure. Well, Kintone is the almost 6-year-old U.S. subsidiary of a 23-year-old Japanese software company. And our parent company today is well known for its progressive, almost revolutionary HR policies and culture, focused on flexible work styles, gender equality, and radical but respectful transparency. Our parent won the #1 Great Place to Work for Women in Japan again this year, as well as the #1 Great Place to Work overall for small, medium-sized businesses in Japan. But it definitely wasn't always this way. The company actually launched in 1997, went public in 2000 as the fastest company in Japanese history to go from inception to IPO. And back then, it was very much a traditional Japanese and kind of hard-charging technology startup, putting company and profits really over people with a grueling culture and kind of across-the-board, around-the-clock work expectations for the employees. And in those early years, right after the IPO in 2000, even as revenue was growing pretty significantly, employee turnover was really starting to skyrocket. And it really reached a head around 2005 when employee churn reached almost 30%. Pretty disconcerting. And at that point, leadership, kudos to them, took a really big step back and reflected on the situation. Their mission from the outset was to make teamwork better by providing these office productivity and collaboration software tools. And while the product was doing quite well, they were actually failing miserably, internally at least, to make teamwork better, as there were so many people leaving the team. They decided to fundamentally change the nature and culture of the company and to put employees first rather than the company. Of course, that was more easily said than done. But what they did was start with a really revolutionary concept for Japanese companies, even today, but certainly back in 2005, even more so, that stated 100 different people have 100 different work styles. And that really opened up the door for a whole slew of new policies that supported things like remote work, part-time work, different schedules, as well as gender equality, like an astounding 6-year maternity leave and a mama internship program to help mothers who left the workplace to raise kids get back into the workplace. And for the next 5 to 6 years, as this transformation unfolded, revenue growth was actually very flat. They were essentially kind of stuck at around $30 million in revenue for this stretch of time. But during those years, employee turnover steadily decreased until by 2011, it dropped below 5%, where it has now stayed ever since. On the other hand, from 2011 on, revenue growth has been accelerating now and is now quite a bit over $130 million. So 2011 was a significant year. It was also when in Japan, we launched Kintone, the product, which is a transparent team collaboration platform wrapped around a no-code build-your-own business software system, which is what we started selling here in the US in 2014. And that's the period of time that I've been with the company.
What a transformation story, and how they've grown and really helped customize the employee experience. It's fascinating.
Yeah, it's really remarkable to be a part of it. And I've been very fortunate to kind of step right into it midstream and be able to sort of deploy many of the policies and the activities that have been developed.
In March, when the San Francisco Bay Area issued a shelter-in-place order, your company was able to quickly shift to a completely remote workforce. Can you tell us about how you and your team made this decision and how you did it so rapidly, and also what you learned as you adapted to this sudden change?
So, in fact, we actually went totally remote in the US on March 5th, which was a little over a week before the Bay Area's shelter-in-place order came down. I think, being a global company based in Asia, we were watching pretty closely what was going on with the pandemic throughout February. And our parent company had already prepared kind of a levels system for responding to external shocks, just like this pandemic or natural disasters. And level 1 recommended work from home. Level 2 kind of required work from home, but had some approval-based exceptions. And then we had a level 3, which essentially required work from home with just about no exceptions. So with that level system already in place and a long history of already supporting remote work, it was pretty easy for us to go from already kind of a partially remote company to completely remote essentially overnight, once we started hearing about some of the cases popping up in the Bay Area. But, of course, work from home is very different when it's 100% mandatory for so many people who hadn't been working from home regularly. And now suddenly we're in homes or apartments that were crowded with roommates or with kids who are no longer in school or daycare. It's a very different experience than sort of a voluntary work from home experience. And so I think we learned, even with that experience and some of the policies in place and the tools in place, that there was a lot of adjustment that needed to be made to support some of the folks who weren't used to remote work, or at least, again, this type of mandatory work from home, in terms of dealing with things like equipment and scheduling and unexpected interruptions. So I think, the values of flexibility and trust and communication have definitely risen to the top here as necessary things we need to consider, necessary values and actions as we made this transition.
I'm glad you're bringing up all the things that we're challenged with every single day. And I feel like right now, many employers with employees working remotely are trying to figure out what this new normal looks like for their workforce. So I wanted to ask you what sorts of changes, for example, in terms of culture and policy, you think that these employers should consider with this new remote workplace environment that we're now working and also living in.
Yeah, good question. In terms of culture or policy, certainly the points I just highlighted there are critical, being trust, I think, being a really key one. We're all in our own places. We're not in the office together. And so we really need to have that trust amongst team members that everyone is there doing their jobs, they're taking responsibility, and they're going to be there for you, even when we're all remote. And I think that requires a great deal of transparency. I think trust in general requires transparency. And, for us, at least, we use a platform, our own platform that helps manage all our business processes and communicate with all of our teammates. And we actually, have sort of, I guess, up the ante a little bit in terms of encouraging folks to share their activities and share kind of the things they're working on sort of a daily and weekly basis in this open platform. And the system itself helps sort of encourage that transparency by having sort of business operations and workflows very transparent as well. And so, having that type of unified platform for communication and for business operations really helps with that transparency, helps with the trust. And so I think that's one thing, trying to be as open and transparent as possible. And then I mentioned flexibility. These are very unusual circumstances, as I kind of alluded to, things like toddlers crawling into the middle of Zoom calls, lunch getting prepared in the background. There's no real clear separation between work and home. And, people I think also are struggling kind of with their daily clocks and schedules. So being flexible and understanding individual circumstances has really never been so important as it is now. And, creating policies that can support those. And even just, stating as a leader that, hey, it's fine to have your toddler wave hello and make noise in the meeting. It's accepted and that's fine. So people don't feel undue stress when things like that happen. And then of course the communication is just absolutely essential. And, what we've done, we've tried to intentionally increase communication opportunities, be it social or business related, around maybe things like social hours or game nights or, encouraging remote lunches or coffees amongst teammates. And as I mentioned before, things like sharing weekly activities or weekly tasks. I think all those things really need to be encouraged and supported to help keep the team together, as well as, mentally healthy at this time.
I love you that you're talking about all these things, because flexibility right now, adaptability is really key, because we don't know what tomorrow is going to look like in this coronavirus pandemic world.
We don't. And, obviously where we see a lot of challenges in this sort of enforced digital transformation, there's also, a recognition that this type of remote work can be really good for certain folks and for organizations, providing a higher level of flexibility in schedules, for some folks, providing, a lot more opportunity to spend time with family when you have the opportunity to eliminate commutes. I know I myself had about a 3-hour and 30-minute, round trip commute, and I've been able to, spend a lot more quality time with family as a result of this transition. So lots of challenges, but also some upsides, which I think are, as they are being recognized, and folks in some cases are feeling even more productive in this new normal, that it's going to be, a really significant acceleration, I think, of this remote work trend that is happening and will continue to happen as a result.
Let's take a reset. This is Jessica Miller Merrill, and you are listening to the Workology podcast, sponsored by Workology. Today we're talking with Dave Landa about work from home strategies.
Are you tired of putting your professional development on the back burner? It's time for you to invest in yourself with Upskill HR by Workology. We're a membership community focused on personal development for HR. Gain access to our elite community, training, coaching, and events. Learn more at upskillhr.com.
This global health crisis looks like it will permanently change how we define our workplace environment. And you recently had a webinar on COVID-19 work from home, where you discussed the interplay between culture, policies, and tools. Can you talk to us a little bit about that?
Yeah. This is actually something that we have been talking about for years, kind of as it relates to transformations and digital transformations. But we see culture, policies, and tools as really deeply intertwined. Again, when it comes to managing any kind of transformation, be it digital transformation, teamwork transformation, or any really big changes, like this mandatory sudden switch to remote work in an organization. And I think, the way we think about it is that you can start with tools, like a change in tools, new tools, or you can start with policies, kind of like what my parent company did in Japan when dealing with that really sort of dissatisfied employee base. But culture always either influences or is influenced by the adoption of new technologies and or new policies. And really the key here is trying to find that balance and getting that balance right. Finding the right tools that might support most effectively those new policies, perhaps around greater transparency. It's really critical that you understand that interplay and you try to find a good meshing of those. And while both of sort of these new policies and tools are deployed, they're certainly going to have an impact on the culture of an organization as people start doing things a different way, perhaps, or again, with policies in place, people start being compelled to do things differently. And maybe you start with the tools, or maybe you start with a change in culture in mind, and then maybe you start with the policies. But again, regardless of where you start, what is really important is that the interrelation of these three are totally understood, and essentially, we're very intentional about how you try to align them, and very intentional about the recognition of how they do in fact influence one another. I think that's really the way we see those three core elements being essential to any kind of core transformation that happens.
I love that. And we're going through a lot of personal and professional transformation now. We
Mhm.
traditionally looked at remote work as a company perk. Twitter even announced that their employees can work from home forever. Many other companies have followed suit. What's your suggestion to smaller organizations? How can they provide similar flexibility and adapt to current circumstances?
Yeah, that's a good question. Obviously, the big players like Twitter and Google, Apple, Facebook, they have a lot of resources to provide that sort of flexibility effectively, and still maintain maybe significant offices for folks to have those options. Smaller organizations maybe don't have that same sort of flexibility, those same sort of resources. And I think, obviously it depends on the kind of business when you're talking about small businesses. Certain businesses like hospitality or manufacturing or distribution can have limits on how much they can go remote. But for smaller firms and industries that can go remote, I think it's really important to lean into these technologies. Obviously, like Zoom and Slack, that create the type of communication capabilities that are necessary. Um, but also, other technologies, inexpensive technologies that can allow businesses to manage a whole variety of their operations and their business workflows more efficiently in a remote way. And there's lots of tools out there that can provide that type of transparency and productivity, that can give the flexibility, can give the capability to small companies to have flexible work style policies in the future. And I think in this case, I think tools kind of lead for the smaller businesses to be able to do that, or to kind of follow suit with the remote work possibilities for their employees.
How can HR and company leaders support work from home initiatives and maintain a high level of engagement? You talked about game nights, coffee, It's not just engagement, though, it's productivity. We need both these things to happen.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think, it's setting some parameters within the tools. The tools are critical, like I just mentioned, for small business. I think it's across the board for us to be productive, for organizations to be productive, and the various different team members to be productive. Yes, mental health and a feeling of engagement's key, but having the tools that enable that productivity are absolutely essential, and providing some guidelines and some support for utilization of those tools, I think, are critical as well. And yeah, ultimately that productivity is a function of having the tools and having the I guess the training around those tools to be able to utilize them to their fullest extent. To me, I think being in the sort of technology space and seeing how our team members, when we did go fully mandatory, we actually ended up mandatory remote work. We actually ended up leaning on some of our team members doing remote work all the time already, really give us some training on some of the tools we already had so that we could use this more effectively and more productively. So, we kind of sought out some of our experts in-house to provide some training for the other team members on those tools, which I think was critical to our improvement.
I love that you tap into your functional experts within the organization. It's a learning opportunity and an engagement opportunity for everyone. What about burnout? I know that during COVID, at least for me, I have a hard time with the separation when I work from home. And so it's easy for me to be working all the time, 24/7. And my office is now a 15-second commute. What steps should managers take to help their people avoid that? And what can they do to watch out for it?
Yeah, that's, we're finding that you're not alone. I would say we're finding that is definitely a big issue that's come to the forefront in our organization recently. And certainly judging from what you just said and sort of the content we see out there and social media and the blogosphere, one of our team members, Melina, just published a blog on the topic this week, interviewing a bunch of our team members on their challenges and some of the things that they've done. And I think, the key here, like with so many other issues, is really good, transparent communication among team members, among leaders and teammates, and really asking members specifically, are you able to turn work off? How do you turn it off? Talk about, what kind of activities or hobbies they may be doing away from work that you can kind of schedule to turn it off and do something else. Asking folks, are they taking PTO to refresh and recharge, and sort of encouraging folks to do that. Sometimes we find when we're at home and we don't really have an opportunity or an option to go anywhere that, we're not taking PTO because we can't really go on vacation. But we found it's really good for folks to refresh and recharge, to take a PTO, even if it's at home, just to do something around the house. So I think for us, it's about that communication. It's about asking folks. It's about providing different potential ideas for folks to do. In that blog post I mentioned, a lot of our team members talked about the hobbies they're doing, about in-home gardening or cooking. So just encouraging that type of separation, I think, has been really critical for us in dealing with the potential for burnout.
With all this working from home, our home offices, they weren't maybe originally designed for this purpose. I actually had a phone call with a friend of mine, and she's working out of her closet because it's the quietest place in her house. So what allowances and policies have you considered to support remote employees who are working for the long term, and why?
Yeah, that's a great call too. Again, one of the earlier things that we did as a team, another one of our early blog posts back in April, was everyone kind of shared with pictures what their work from home environment looked like. And yeah, we had a couple closets as well, but so different and so unique. Very few people had their own sort of office environment that was really separated. Some of our already 100% remote had much better setups, and seeing the pictures of what they had gave other folks ideas of what they could do. So I think that just kind of sharing and making people aware of what other people were dealing with, and what other really cool ideas other people had was really helpful at the outset. But in terms of policy, what we did, and we've heard other organizations do this as well, was to provide a stipend for team members to use almost anything within reason that would help them work more comfortably, more effectively from home. And a lot of folks ended up getting things like new chairs and new desks, but it was really up to the individual how they were going to spend that, again kind of within reason. But if it was something that was just to keep strong mental health, so it could have been for taking remote yoga classes, or something that could be seen as a way to just support folks' focus, their ability again to be more comfortable, more efficient at home. That stipend was made available for everybody. So I think those are key things. Some of the policies around flexibility of scheduling and where they work was already in place. So I think just sharing and the stipend were the two key things for us.
Thank you. I love that you guys gave a stipend that allowed people to be able to get the tools or the resources or the support that they needed, and they get to pick and customize it just for them. That's amazing.
It aligns really well with one of our vision, which is our teamwork culture. We actually have 4 values. One is sharing a common vision, but another one is respecting individuality. And this really aligned with that. We actually had a big conversation internally. How should those stipends be dispersed, and what should it be used for? And we really fell back on that core value around respecting individuality when we ultimately gave it out to the team.
I want to move on to Zoom, because Zoom is now a verb. Everybody's Zooming. We're Zooming right now.
Yeah.
Do you have any interesting Zoom anecdotes you would like to share?
Let's see. There's been quite some interesting ones. One thing I know that our team has been enjoying doing is using the backgrounds, and like seeing how many kind of grabbing screen capture of other people's backgrounds, and then putting their faces into additional backgrounds and adding more and more team members into their backgrounds as a result of doing that. It's been kind of a bit of a game for our folks. Another one I had mentioned before was toddlers sort of wandering into Zoom meetings. I think we do a TTT it's called TTT for Tuesday 10 o'clock touch base. We've been doing it for years before we went completely remote. It's certainly taken on a lot more importance these days. Some of our toddler friends who tend to join us regularly, weekly, one of them actually more recently had earplugs in the ear. I think he was about 2 years old, and he wanted to be a part of it. He saw everyone on the screen, and his mother put earplugs in his ear. It wasn't connected to the computer, but he was in there with his earplugs, looking at everybody and paying attention, which was really, really funny. And then I think one other one was we do this. We went from a monthly social hour to a weekly social hour, and what was only in person in the past, kind of happy hour, to a remote one. And different. We have folks in different time zones, and so we've got one person who always joins kind of that social hour right as he is working on dinner. So it's become kind of a bit of a game to guess, what he may be fixing for dinner tonight. And then he kind of unveils what it is he's cooking when he turns his video screen on, and it's always kind of a fun little game. So those are some anecdotes on the positive side. There's been some challenges, like folks dealing with some of the weird bugs that some computers have, where computers just shut off right in the middle of Zoom. But yeah, there's, it's a different world. We are Zooming every day, all day, and there's a lot of getting used to things, but trying to make it as fun as possible as well.
I really love the things that you're doing, and I think you really have some great tips and suggestions and antidotes for HR professionals who are listening right now that are thinking about long-term work from home strategies. I wanted to thank you for taking the time to talk with us today, and then ask you, where can people go to learn more about you and then Kintone as well?
Yeah, sure. So, I'm on LinkedIn. I'm just Dave Landa. You can find me at LinkedIn and Kintone, and also on Twitter, same Dave Landa at Twitter. And then on Kintone, it's kintone.com. We have, if you look under our resources, we have a whole section devoted to remote work. And so that includes some of the blog posts I mentioned. We have webinars we've done as well, quite a few webinars on different aspects of remote work, be it, tips and tricks, be it policies, be it actual tools and solutions. So you can find that at kintone.com under the resources section.
Awesome. Well, we'll link to certainly your webinar, and then at least another blog post in the resources section of this podcast, as well as Dave's LinkedIn profile. So you can get his Twitter, his LinkedIn, and all the blogs and the things that you need over at workology.com. Thanks again, Dave, for taking the time to join us.
Yeah, thank you so much, Jessica. It was a pleasure talking with you.
With such a large share of the U.S. workforce converting to remote work, HR and company leaders have to be skilled in engaging an off-site employee base. This means we have to build people-first policies that enable our remote workers to be productive, engaged, and educated on best practices for working from home, especially for employees who may be working remotely for the first time in their careers. A big thank you to Dave Landa for sharing his company's experience with creating a successful 100% remote workforce. Thank you for joining the Workology podcast, sponsored by Workology. This podcast is for the disruptive workplace leader who's tired of the status quo. This is Jessica Miller Merrill. Until next time, visit workology.com to listen to all our episodes of the Workology podcast. Workology podcast. Workology podcast. Workology podcast.